Welcome to today's Awesome Marriage Podcast. Today, my guest is Rick Reynolds. He's the president. He's the founder of Affair Recovery. Rick holds a master's degree in social work. He's a clinical member of the American Association of Marriage and Family Therapists. In 1992, Rick developed and began leading Affair Recovery groups. This is such an important topic. We have a great expert with us today. Let's go right to the studio. Well, Rick, I am so excited to welcome you to the Awesome Marriage Podcast. I love what you do. I know that many people that you've helped with through Affair Recovery. And so it's an honor to have you here today and get to spend time and let you share some of your wisdom with our audience. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Kim. I really appreciate the fact that I get to speak to the people that follow your podcast, and it's an honor to be here with you.
Yeah, thank you so much. So you are the founder of Affair Recovery. So kind of tell us, I know the story, but tell us, people that don't know, how you came to work in this field.
Well, I've kind of volunteered for this particular field. Back in 1984, I actually got into an affair with my best friend's wife and my wife's best friend. And the miraculous thing about all of that is the way the Lord helped pull us back out of that and actually gave us a marriage from that was better than ever. And the process we went through, to me, was so miraculous. It was something that years later, when I came back, because I was a therapist at the time. I mean, can you believe that?
Yeah.
I actually,
Of course.
of course. So I actually got out of therapy after that and went into home building. So I thought I'd rather be a home builder than a home wrecker, which made sense to me somehow.
Absolutely.
And the Lord opened up the door later for me to go back into therapy. And the one thing on my heart that I felt God placed in my heart was, how do you help couples? We had learned a lot. And I felt like I was actually being called to try to work with 50,000 couples a year. And so that's where Affair Recovery began, in terms of how do you work that out and help couples find the miracle of restoration.
Yeah. Yeah. I think just you understand where couples are. You guys were there. You have a depth of understanding that other people don't. And I think the fact that you guys came out on the other side, because people need, my experience has been working with couples in that situation, they need a glimmer of hope of something. And so where they can see someone that has been through it and has a marriage that's better, that's got to mean a lot to the people that come through and benefit from Affair Recovery.
And I think that was one of the things that was helpful for Stephanie and I, my wife, was a couple that had been through it and walked with us, which is one of the premises that Affair Recovery is based on, that healed individuals are terribly important in this journey, because it's the thing that lets you know it can be done, because it doesn't feel possible when you're in the midst of it.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. So one of the things I think is interesting, I think, as Christians, we have a lot of misconceptions. I think, I think even before I got into counseling, thought that, well, if you're a Christian, you don't have marriage problems, because, God's going to take care of everything. But I think some people would say that they would like to believe that infidelity is not as common among Christian marriages as it is a secular marriage. In your experience, is that true or not?
Not at all. I've always believed, if you look at Romans chapter 7, where it talks about when we're told not to do something, it says that sin seizes the opportunity afforded by the law and puts us to death. I mean, ultimately, the whole aspect of being told not to, I think it makes it even more difficult in some ways for Christians. And in that sense, I don't see that morals necessarily are the things that keep us whole. In fact, this past week I was thinking about Genesis chapter 3. Someone was saying, well, if you loved me, how in the world could this happen? There's no way you could love me. And I was thinking, God loved Adam and Eve perfectly. Adam and Eve loved God perfectly. They were literally living in paradise. That did not stop them. When temptation came, they still fell. So it's not love that stops us, or a great situation that stops us. Even Adam and Eve, God's kids, made the wrong decision. When we fall, what's important is what we do afterwards.
Yes.
People will fall, but what are you going to do?
Yeah, that's such a story that we all know, and it's such a I've really never thought of it in that way, but it makes total sense. It's just like same with the children of Israel that had God as their leader or follower, and they kept going away. But this is an actual husband and wife marriage situation that they stepped away from God in that, and
Right.
so we can all do that. One of the things that I think that I was going to bounce off of you too, that I kind of feel like as Christians, a lot of Christians don't realize they're vulnerable or don't accept the fact that they're vulnerable, that they just, well, I'm a Christian, I'm not good. So they don't do the things to maybe put constraints in place, maybe make decisions ahead of time of how they're going to handle a situation. And so they find themselves in a mess. Do you see that?
Oh, yeah. Peggy Vaughn years ago, I think back in maybe the 80s or 90s, wrote a book called The Monogamy Myth. And her point was when we get married, we naturally assume that we won't have a problem because of
Yeah.
that. And yet, that is really one of the biggest mistakes, believing that we can get into. I mean, the reason I think Stephanie trusts me is because I don't trust myself. All
Hmm.
the time, when we travel, I'll go, she'll trust God, but I go, I
Yeah.
don't trust me. So I don't put myself in situations where I'll get in trouble. Most Christians don't consider that. I mean, we only get in trouble. Well, I always say we're only going to be as weak as our strongest link. It's because where we think we won't have a problem, it allows us out of hubris or pride to put ourselves in situations that really are high risk. We just think nothing
Hmm.
will happen. But in reality, that's exactly where things will happen.
Exactly, exactly. And I think, we have an enemy that wants to destroy our marriages, and he certainly can jump all over those situations where he knows that we haven't put some things in place.
Right. And it's so interesting how all it takes is one bad day, one moment. I mean, you might handle a situation well 20 times, but it's the
Hmm.
21st time. And sometimes, I'll have somebody come in here and the wife is really upset because maybe they've looked at porn or they've done something and they'll be telling me the story. And then I'll finally, after I hear the whole story, I go, well, heck, I would have done the same thing. And the
Mm.
wife goes, what? And I'll go, yeah, the only difference between me and them is I would have never put myself in that situation because I know what I would have done. So I would have never
Absolutely.
assumed nothing would happen. That's the difference.
Absolutely. Yeah, I guess it's in some ways we want to act like we are not vulnerable to things that we're vulnerable to, or that that, well, I wouldn't do that. Um, But man, I've never worked with somebody that walked out the door one day and said, "I think I'll go have an affair." I've never
Exactly.
worked out that. You don't. It's
Exactly.
just baby steps. It's seeing somebody at Starbucks and you kind of figure out what time they get there, and then you kind of figure out, okay, I think I'll get there at the same time,
Hmm.
because that person was nice or they spoke nice or whatever. Just little baby steps that seem innocent, but you just can't take those, can you? I mean, you just can't take any baby
Not at
step.
all. I mean, learning, I think a lot of times we have ways of relating to people that we developed, maybe in adolescence even. And we
Mhm.
just assume that the same means will work in a married life without considering the fact that maybe we need to kind of grow up. And instead of looking to other people to kind of meet our needs, literally accept the fact that we need to be the people that are really kind of bringing life to other people. I mean, I'm not talking about one of the things we talk about all the time is a term called pimping tenderness, where we'll be trying to be nice at work, for instance. Well, not your job. I mean, I can be kind, but I don't need to be the person trying to fix other people's, or especially someone of the opposite sex. I don't need to be the one
Yes.
fixing their problem. I don't need to be
Exactly.
engaging them in that way. I need to be someone who is talking about my family, not engaging, being nice, but being professional. I don't need to be talking about personal things and opening up
Right.
any possibility for something going wrong.
because you don't really know what that other person is going through, and if you right,
Yes, you don't know how you're impacting them. Can I give another example? Like I
absolutely,
had at one of our seminars, I had a wife of a doctor drag him up by his ear and hold up his phone and say, "Tell him this is inappropriate." And it was actually a text from a tech in his operating room. And
mm,
he said, "Rick, this is normal. We're a surgical team. They were just asking about music, blah, blah, blah." And I said, "Look," he said, "Oh, he said it's normal." And I said, "Look, normal is a cycle on a washing machine.
mm,
And more than that, you're not normal. You've already had 3 affairs. I mean, the fact is you don't understand." I said, if another tech had responded to this text, that's like a nickel for nickel exchange.
yeah,
But because of who you represent in their life, when you responded to that text, that is like a silver dollar to a nickel. And you have no
mm,
idea how you're impacting that other person because of who you represent. You see them this way, but they see you this way. So you're setting
absolutely,
yourself up without even knowing it, and you're setting them up.
yeah. Do you think he heard what you're saying?
Oh, I think his wife was about to rip his ear off, so I'm not sure he could hear anything at that point. She was pretty lit up.
Oh, bless it. Yeah, and understandable,
Mhm.
so much that but I think that's such a good example because in our culture, so many things I think are accepted now or tolerated now that we would have they've been red flags 10 or 15 years ago. And we didn't, what iPhone came out in '07, so we 20 years ago we didn't have any of these things, social media, texting, all those things to communicate with. Now it's just so easy. And if I feel like if we don't put some constraints in place, like you're talking about, we're just asking for it.
Oh, I agree 100%.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so I think just realizing that is something that Christians are going to deal with, and that sometimes I even think we may be more vulnerable than others because of just what we've talked about, because we're Christians and we think we're not going to do that. Or I just feel that anytime as a husband or a wife you begin to get needs met outside of marriage that should be met in marriage, that you're going to be in trouble.
Or you start trying to meet somebody else's needs that is not your responsibility to meet.
I love that too. Yeah,
That's the other thing
absolutely.
about, we want to be good, we want to be kind, we want to be giving, but that is also a boundary violation.
Yeah. So doing the things to protect yourself and protect your marriage are important. So let's talk about when a couple affairs happen. What are some of the common problems they run into or mistakes they make afterwards in the recovery process?
I'm sorry. The reason I'm laughing, the first thing I think of is they talk to the wrong people and get bad advice.
I agree.
And that is also sometimes from people, Dr. Kim, that ultimately should be able to know what to say, but they don't know what to say. And I think that a lot of times the first thing people do after discovery is, there's so much shame and shock and betrayal. Different people respond different ways, but isolating and cutting off and letting the shame keep them from doing anything is not helpful. I mean, that's really one of the
Mm,
reasons that at affairrecovery.com, we set it up so that we actually have what's called a boot camp, First Steps Boot Camp, which it takes couples through a 7-day process just to give them the ability to talk about things in a productive way, to
hmm
give them realistic expectations, to let them begin to understand some about what does discovery look like, what's the importance of honesty, what is trauma, what's the role trauma is playing in all of this. But
Sure.
we find if we can help couples just find a little bit of stability in the very beginning, it kind of affords them opportunity to see a therapist who knows what they're doing, to get involved in community, because community is probably, in my opinion, safe community is probably the most effective thing you can do.
Mm.
I don't know if you've ever studied like social baseline theory. It's one of the concepts that we work off of. But
Uh-huh.
when you're in a safe community, it's like it helps. There's a thing called load sharing, but it literally helps you emotionally regulate so that you can communicate. And again, with that whole stability, we were made to be embedded in community, and yet shame causes us to want to isolate immediately
Hmm.
afterwards. So
Yeah, I think, and
that helps.
yeah, I've seen it. I totally agree with you. It reminded me of one couple, and because this woman, the husband had the affair, but she would not. I was the only other person in the world
Hmm.
that knew, because she was afraid it would get back to her children and how that would impact her. And it was she needed somebody. She needed at least one or two other women that she could talk to and that would support her and help her through that. And so I think it's so important that we're willing to bring someone else in. And I understood. I tried to encourage her, but there's only so much you can do. And they did make it. They made it through. But it was I just saw her struggle in a lot of ways because she didn't have that community. She didn't have a group or a couple of other ladies that she could talk to.
And it does have to be safe. I mean, we've
Yeah.
set it up at a fair recovery where literally it's anonymous and you don't even have to see the other people, but you're still with like-minded people who can talk to you. And that's just crucial because you learn
Yeah.
then that you're not the only one. You're not alone.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, let's plug affairrecovery.com because I've been on the website. It is awesome. It is a first place to go, I think, when something like this happens, because I was just thinking of two or three situations I've had where there's discovery, they reach out to some couples, well-meaning people, but they come
Yeah.
and they just blow it apart. I mean, they're just not helpful at all, and we're not all trained to do that. So I get that. I mean, they're trying to be helpful, but I think it can do more damage sometimes. And so, the quicker you get to someone that understands what's
Hmm.
going on and can give you some steps that are the right steps to begin the process, makes such a difference in the world. Because I've seen a couple of couples I think of that it was the meeting they had with another couple was a real setback for them.
Right. And even for therapists, to be honest, you and I were talking about beforehand, it's really one of the most difficult things therapeutically to deal with because it's so hard because somebody's going to think you're on the other person's side. I mean, there's
Yeah.
so much conflict and you're so polarized that it's difficult to stay in the middle as a therapist. But when you're in a group, uh, half the people being, on one side of the fence, half the people being the
Hmm.
other side of the fence, at least you feel totally understood and you don't feel alone.
I agree. I think it's you said that being understood. I think it's a husband that's had an affair. I think has to work really hard at understanding the depth of pain that his wife's going
Hmm.
through. Do you see that too?
Yeah, that is actually most people think that what a couple needs with a betrayed spouse will often think what they need is information, and they do need information. They need to
Sure.
be able to understand it to wrap their mind around it. But more importantly, what heals is empathy and emotional responsiveness.
Mm,
It's their mate trying to understand them. That's what lets them know that they're thinking about them. They're trying to understand them. And that's what brings about that attachment, what begins to heal that attachment wound.
absolutely. That's really good. So, what holds people back, spouses back from recovery? Both sides. Let's talk about the betrayed spouse and then talk about the spouse who had the affair. With the betrayed spouse, what holds them back from recovery? What are the obstacles that you see?
Maybe the biggest one is what I call ascribed shame. And what I mean by shame, it's not that they did anything wrong, but they've been dishonored as a result. And honor is kind of the what we believe is the opinion, the good opinion that others hold of us, how we are seen in their eyes. When this happens, suddenly that social credit score, that honor we've tried to build up for years, is shattered. And suddenly now we no longer feel honorable. In fact, like my
Mm.
wife, right after my confession, she went to a bookstore to buy a book on infidelity. This was back in 1984. There was only one. And But she knew everybody in that store knew her husband had cheated on her, and she was feeling intense shame as a
Yeah.
result of even having to get that book. And that's what I call ascribed shame. She was feeling the shame of what I had done, and it felt
Yeah.
dishonorable. Since I dishonored her, it almost felt like it was dishonorable for her to even stay with me. As you know, in honor shame cultures, when we dishonor the
Right.
family, a lot of times there's honor violence. They'll kill the person that dishonors the
Yeah.
family. And so it feels like you're crazy for being there. So that is a huge barrier. And
Hmm.
it's interesting, a survey we did, Dr. Kim, a few years ago said the one thing that the wayward spouse could do that really helped restore honor to their mate was really work a strong recovery program. When they saw their mate trying really hard not to be that other person again, they didn't feel like such a fool for being there. But if their mate just said, "Oh, well, I'll never do it again," that wasn't
Hmm.
so assuring and they still felt pretty stupid.
Yeah, it makes so much sense. Because I've had, yeah, because they're gonna. I think that's something that, depending on the situation, that a number of wives struggle with. And we're talking about men having the affair. Obviously, both male and females can have affairs, but I've had so many women say, all their friends say, "How can you stay with him?" And
Right,
how can you stay with him? And so then they begin to feel like, am I crazy for staying with him? But I think when you see if he's really working it and he's really repentant and trying to grow, not do this
right.
again, then I think it's worth it to stay
Well,
in there.
so many people tell me, my wife will say, "I'm not that crazy about my first husband, but I really like my second husband." And um, I've had so many women say that. In fact, the person I was just meeting with prior to our interview was saying, "Man, I love this new marriage I've got, but I don't want the first one."
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. Absolutely. Okay, let's go to the other side. What about what blocks the spouse who had the affair? What makes them hold back from recovery?
Shame, also. I mean, shame,
Yeah.
so much of infidelity to me is really about developmental trauma. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's there, they were, it's not an excuse, but something made them vulnerable to that, I think, even to begin with. And in our culture, uh, I think that the internet, everything that's happened, it's almost like infidelity's been exonerated on media. I mean, it's like it's almost glorified. And because of kind of shifting cultural pieces, I think there are a lot of things, but developmental trauma maybe set them up
Mm-hmm.
to begin with. And maybe they learned to live a dual life a long time ago, or maybe they got drunk and did something really stupid. I think there's so many different reasons.
Sure.
But once it happens, I think most people are afraid of they believe that if they are honest, there's no way the other person will stay with them.
Mm.
What I've learned is that you can never be loved unconditionally. However, if you only conditionally let the other person know who you are, when you
Absolutely.
finally can take responsibility and fully be known and show up authentically, then there's a chance to have that different sort of marriage.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I've seen is where the spouse who did have the affair doesn't tell everything, but they tell their
Mm-mm.
spouse they've had everything. And then it seems like it always comes out later. Or you're
Right.
living under this deal of, well, if she ever finds out this, the rest of the story, we're done.
Right. And there's two things that cause that. In fact, we talk about this in boot camp. That's the free part. But we talk about it's where one will be deal breakers. So maybe the betrayed spouse, in an attempt to get their mate to say everything, will sit there and say something like, "Okay, you've got one chance to tell me everything. And if you don't tell me everything, if there's
Mm,
anything else, then we're done." Well, at that point, it's kind of like you've got a gun up to a person's head, and
yeah.
if so, I can't tell you because everything's done. One of the things, again, my friend Peggy Vaughn said was that you need to be safe enough for your mate to be able to tell you the information. But really, the wayward spouse really needs to understand that disclosure is really the way that trust is reestablished. Because unless you can trust the other person with the information, then they won't ever. That's really the first step of them beginning to trust you.
Yeah.
And, but yeah, it is scary to say everything. But most people, betrayed spouses will say, I think it's almost like 67 or 70% of the time, it's easier for them to get over what their mate did than it is for them to get over continued lying,
Yeah.
because that's what destroys that trust.
Absolutely. I have a question because I think
Yeah.
this has come up a number of times. How much does the offended spouse need to know about the details of an affair, in your opinion?
You're just asking the $1,000,000 question.
I know.
Um,
That's why I ask you. You're my expert.
okay, so here's the deal. It's not information that's going to equal transformation. They do need to know. They need to know a lot. The main thing they need to know is their mate is honestly trying to answer their questions. And
Mm,
but the problem gets to be if they begin to seek a level of detail that allows them to paint a picture in their head, create a video in their head. That ultimately is what creates a whole lot of the betrayal trauma, the intrusive thoughts, the traumatic memories that I end up having to work so hard at healing, because afterwards, let's say they're doing great, they still have those traumatic
hmm
intrusive thoughts coming as a result of having got too much information. So if a therapist can be involved in kind of what we would call a full therapeutic or helpful sort of disclosure, that's great, because it's much better to get all the information at one time than things
hmm
being leaked out over time. Trickle
Sure.
truth is what we call it.
Yeah, I just feel like I don't know that I've ever seen the real detailed details help.
I haven't.
I don't know that you need, every little detail because I think it is hard to get out of your mind. And I think it's important certainly to know what happened, all the stuff a lot of questions need to be answered. And so I always caution people too, and I've had people that didn't take my advice and they were just driven and found out more than and I think probably I can think of two or three people that said, I wish I had known that, and so I think, as therapists, all we can do is warn and counsel. But I think there's a line that you just don't, you get into more trouble if you cross it.
Right. I mean, the good news is over time we've learned, and all the research and stuff on memory, I can usually take out one of those memories in about 30 minutes time. So a lot of times I'll meet with somebody for 2 or 3 hours and get rid of the really bad intrusive thoughts.
Yes.
So there are techniques to deal with them, but it's a lot better to avoid it happening to begin with.
Right, right. Yeah, it's not that it can't be. It just adds another layer, I think, of things to have
Hmm.
to deal with in
Oh,
a really,
absolutely.
really tough situation for sure. One of the things that I see, and that when I ask you about, is too, I don't see a lot of times that the spouses are on the same recovery time frame. What do you see in that?
Yeah, so that's really common. What typically happens if you have a graph of satisfaction, like marital satisfaction over time, what will happen is probably the person who strayed, they may have been down here. Once they begin to things get going in just a few months, they feel great. I mean,
Yeah.
ultimately, they've got their life back. They feel free. They feel like they're becoming a new person. For a
Hmm.
lot of times for the betrayed spouse, they were up here and now suddenly after discovery, they're down here. And it takes much longer for them to begin to go back up again.
Yeah.
And that's a really common problem. So, usually for the betrayed spouse, it's going to be, we were saying the timeline, 3 months is about as bad as it gets, around 8 to 9 months. most couples are doing better. It gets a lot worse at 12 months again because of the 1 year anniversary, which sets
Mm,
off a lot of triggers. It's much better
sure.
again at 15 months. At 24 months, you remember, but typically the intensity of any sort of intrusive thoughts are much better. By 5 years, a lot of couples laugh about it. At 30 something years, like somebody asked my wife, they were actually telling her about a situation, and Steph's first response was, "Well, I can't imagine what that'd feel like." And her friend goes, "Well, of course you can imagine what it would feel like." I mean, you get to the place where it's not even a part of what you think about.
Yeah.
But it is. Most people say 3 to 5 years. Typically, if you're working in our program, it's about 18 to 24 months. Um, so you can heal, but it is a process.
And it does take time. Yeah. And I think if you're on a different, because I think you're exactly right. It seems like if it is the man that's had the affair, and once everything comes out, it's like this huge load has got off of his back, and then you can't find the wife because she's buried under it. And
That's exactly the load he dumped
you know,
is on top of her.
yeah, yeah. Which and so I do think the things you said about taking time, being and just knowing there's no shortcut to it. I think you've just got to go through the things, and I think the more you have a professional helping you your program, those things are going to help people get through it. And I think the more you build your marriage, I've got one couple comes to mind, and they're probably 4 years out. Oh, they would look back and say they hated what happened, but their marriage is better than
Oh,
ever it
yeah,
had been. Yeah, and they wouldn't have worked on it like they did if it didn't happen. So, which I think a lot of that's God's grace too.
it is. But obviously, the best marriages I know went through this largely
Mm,
because they don't take it for granted anymore.
no,
They
no,
work hard.
absolutely. Yeah, we talked a little bit about shame for both. How do you counsel people to handle the shame? Because I think it plays out. There's similarities and there's individual differences. It seems to me like with shame.
Right. So for the wayward spouse, honestly, Dr. Kim, I think you have to blaspheme shame. I
Mm,
mean, if the blasphemy is taking the name of God and using it in common everyday language like it means nothing. I mean, if money were your God, the way you would blaspheme money isn't by maybe giving it away, you'd still benefit. But if you were burning $100 bills, I would know you don't care about the God of money. The way you deal with shame is you blaspheme it by exposing it. You find safe people, however, like because we have groups for the wayward men, and it's called Hope for Healing. And one of the things you do is you begin to talk about that shame, or 12-step groups do the same thing. When you
hmm
can expose it and treat it like it doesn't have power anymore, you slowly kill the shame, you blaspheme it. I think for the betrayed spouse, a lot of it is there are ways to restore that honor. Part of it is also by overcoming, being associated with people that you can respect, having
hmm
people celebrate with you your victories, your healing. There are, I mean, that's one of the things about the affair recovery community that I think most people would say giving back and helping and for the betrayed spouses and helping other people find their life again is one of the ways they
mm,
begin to rebuild and to feel really good about themselves and
yeah.
how they've taken this and transformed it and found a new life. Because I think one of the hard things to transition from the previous life, which now it's like we have life before the infidelity. Now there's life after the infidelity. What people have to see is there's far more for them in this new life than there was in the old life.
Mm,
But they have to let go of the old life before they can begin to move into the new life and build anew.
that's true. Is is that hard for some people to let go of the old?
It is, but I think that when you're around other people who are doing that and you
Mm,
witness it and you see what's happening, you know it's possible. When it's just you and you're not connected with other people who've been able to do that and where
hmm
you can see how they've done it, it's hard to believe.
Yeah, it just shows the value of the group and the things that you learn with that. and the experiences you have. Yeah, and I think as a Christian, God doesn't want us to stay in shame. I think
Not
the
at
enemy
all.
wants us to keep us there, but that's not where God wants us.
Yeah, one of the other things I would say for the betrayed spouse, there's a program that John and Leslie, who were therapists on the affair recovery staff, they did a program called Harboring Hope. And
Mm,
again, it puts them in a group with, again, 5 other women who are going through this. But there again, that community is one of the things that begins to normalize what you're going through and helps you, again, not feel isolated and alone, but rather begins to help you see that you're just totally amazing. The fact that you're getting back up and still striving, that you're awesome.
yeah, that's good. That's really good. I was, I know people are listening and they're probably in a situation. A lot of them will be, and I would just encourage them to go to your website. I said that earlier, but it is so simple. It's just like you get on it, it says get started, and you click and you go right to the boot camp, and you can. It's not like it's complicated. Your first steps are free, 7 days, and I think it's just a great way to begin. And you're going to get the right information, and it's so easy to do.
Yeah, one of the other pieces is we have a huge library with tons of resources, like over almost 6,000. And the way we set it up is if you've got a question, you can just type in the search bar and find what you're looking for.
So
And
good.
it helps you. You don't have to just sit there and wait, or you can get on the forums, or you can do a course if you want. But there are so many, like even on YouTube, we have like over 1,000 videos now,
Yeah, that's
and
great.
you'll be able to find what you're looking for.
Yeah, it's a safe place to go to, and the information you're going to get is what the right kind of information for where you are, for sure. Let me switch just a minute. Let's talk about faith and the role that it has in the repair process on both sides. How does a person's faith come into the process?
Well, I think when faith can come into the process, that is absolutely huge. I mean, I think for me, understanding God's love, I mean, I think there was a revelation I had once, which was if God is sovereign, omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, he knew everything I was going to do at the foundations of the
Hmm.
world. I did not shock God. I didn't disappoint God. He had already been well aware and was prepared for this and was preparing me for this long ago and had already appropriated enough the blood of Jesus to cover
Mm,
everything I'd done. And that concept of grace, where I didn't have to, it wasn't about making things up. It wasn't trying to become a better person. It was about living out of the person he had already made me to be. I wasn't a sinner trying to become a saint. I was a saint who was acting like a sinner. And it was time for me to start living out of my true identity. To me, that's the place that faith begins to
so
honestly
good.
play.
Right. Just seeing yourself through God's eyes.
Exactly.
What about the spouse that goes outside the marriage, forgiving themselves? What do you see them go through? That seems to be difficult for
You
many.
know, the first thing, the biggest problem we make are inner vows where we tell ourselves, I'm never going to do that. Or the betrayed spouse says, I'm never going to be with somebody who cheats on me. Ultimately,
Yeah.
inner vows are telling God how life has to be. You say, okay, God, I'm totally yours and I'll go through whatever you want, but I am not going to be cheated on. But I am not going to be angry like my dad. But I am not going to cheat, blah, blah, blah. And then suddenly God says, you think so? And it happens. And at that point, the first step to self forgiveness, I think, is saying, okay, what's that inner vow that I made? I said
Mm,
I would never do this. I need to break that and go, that was a preference. I didn't really want this path, but God, if this is the path you have for me, it's the path I need to walk. I don't, it's not exactly what, but I think that you're not limited by this.
yeah.
And you have to begin by thinking, why did I think that this would, and like, especially, I'm not going to be with somebody who cheated on me. If you
Hmm.
tell yourself that, you're going to feel like an absolute fool for still being in the relationship. you have to be able to say, you know what, it was crazy for me to tell God I wasn't going to do that. But the fact is, Lord, if this is where you want me, then this is where I'll be.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And knowing and just trusting God that he has answers that we don't have on our own. And you've got to I just feel like knowing that God is forgiveness, we have to forgive ourselves, because if
Oh,
we don't,
absolutely.
we're just going to stay stuck, and that's not where
Right.
the Lord wants us.
I mean, I can't go tell, it's pretty arrogant for me to tell God that you say I'm forgivable, but I know I'm not. To think that you know better than God. That's crazy.
Right. Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. This is so good. There's so much. Hopefully, people are encouraged by things we've talked about and know some sources with thefairrecovery.com to get help and to begin to take some steps, because unfortunately, there's a lot of people that are in this situation and going to be in this situation. And a ministry like A Fair Recovery makes a difference, makes such a big difference. So my final well, not quite final, next to final question: what are you loving about your marriage today?
You know, I think my capacity for intimacy prior to this, on a scale of 1 to 10, I didn't know how to be authentic. I'd started living a
Mm,
dual life, a double life, probably at about age 5 when I was sexually molested. Afterwards, it's like the authenticity, the intimacy level we had when I could show up authentically went from like a 2 to an 8 or a 9. I mean, we had a
wow.
totally different ability to connect. I mean, I was a real person. And I think that most that shift in having a real relationship where we could just be honest with each other is absolutely huge. And I love my wife. I didn't like her that much prior to all of this. So I just feel so fortunate to get to be with her. And that's the difference right there.
Yeah, that's so good. That's so good. Want to talk a little bit about the conference coming up, Hope
Thank
Rising? Tell
you. I was
people
hoping you'd get
about
to that.
tell people about that and how they can be a part of that.
So, for those of you who have been betrayed, once a year we put on a conference called Hope Rising, just for the betrayed spouses. And it is a day of encouragement. There are multiple speakers that will be speaking throughout the day, but there's also a time of connection over lunch where you get to talk with other people, where you don't feel alone, and
Mm,
where you can have conversations and panels. And it's just so cool. Again, back to connecting. Most people that come to the conference, it's just like a great booster shot, and
mm,
it gives you encouragement, gives you hope, and I think kind of helps sustain you and even can create new relationships. So I
mm.
strongly recommend it. I've had so many people tell me positive things about it.
That's so good. So when is the next
The
conference?
conference is, believe it or not, October 5th. Sure hope
Okay.
I got that date right. I'm pretty sure.
It's
And
soon.
you can go to the website at fairrecovery.com, and they'll be on the front page in the top toolbar. You'll see the Hope Rising Conference, or the programs and courses. And
Yeah.
you can register, and you can also go back. You'll have access to all the lectures, and you can go back and listen again.
Oh, that's great. That's great. And is it in Austin?
Well, it's in Austin, but it's virtual this year.
Okay, it's
Um,
virtual this year. So you can, no matter where you are.
no matter where you are, you don't have to travel to Austin. There'll be hundreds of other people, men and women. It's not just for women, by the way. There are plenty of men
Sure.
who have also been betrayed. And there's special breakouts, for instance, for the men as well as for the women.
Oh, that's great. So yeah, so the breakout will be virtual, put you in groups, those kind of things.
Right.
Oh, that's good. And I've been in conferences like that, and it is so effective. If people are thinking, well, that's going to be bit, no, it will be so effective. It is amazing how
Oh,
you
it's going to
can
be,
connect with
it'll be
people.
amazing.
Yeah, you can connect with that. I'm so excited to know about that, and we'll say some things about that to encourage people to be a part of that, because
Well, thank you for
um,
that.
all you got to do is register and get in front of your computer. It's pretty
And,
easy.
I think you'll find that there'll be lots of things. Well, it's just going to be a blessing. I mean, again, I can't tell you how many people I've have told me how much it really kind of encouraged them, helped them kind of move forward. And
Yeah.
we all need those moments, especially in this journey, where you can
Hmm.
find that encouragement. I just think it's crucial in the recovery process.
Yeah, and I would just encourage people, if you're kind of hesitant, just take that step. You're not going to regret taking it, and encourage you to do that. Rick, this has been so encouraging. Your story, what you guys went through, and how you're helping people, how God is using you uh, to help people. The website that offers people a step into to begin the healing process, and the conference like this. I just thank you for all you do. I thank you for taking time today to speak with me, and I hope we connect again soon.
Well, I do too. And next time I come to Oklahoma City to see my cousin, I'll find you, okay?
Yes, absolutely. That would be great. I would love that.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you so much.